October 14, 1943, Schweinfurt, Germany, 8:47 hours. Staff Sergeant Raymond Sullivan watched 291 B-17 bombers climb into English sky, 19 years old, 7 months as gunnery instructor. Zero solutions to the problem killing American bomber crews by hundreds. His hands gripped a stopwatch. His notebook contained calculations no officer would approve. In 6 hours, maybe half those bombers would return. Maybe less. The mathematics were brutal. First Schweinfurt raid in August, 60 B-17s lost from 376 aircraft, 600 men dead, missing, captured in single day. German fighters had perfected murder. Messerschmitt Bf-109s, Focke-Wulf 190s, even Me-110 twin-engine destroyers carrying rockets. 400 Luftwaffe fighters waited over Germany. American gunners fired thousands of rounds. Hit nothing. Sullivan had trained 43 gunners since March, taught them everything the manual demanded: lead the target, calculate deflection, smooth trigger control, then watch those gunners climb into bombers and fly toward Germany. Some returned. Most disappeared into casualty lists. The ones who survived told identical stories. German fighters attacking head-on. 12 o'clock high. Combined closing speed 600 miles per hour. 3 seconds to acquire. Aim, fire. Impossible to hit. Physics made hitting impossible. Human brain could not calculate deflection angles at those speeds. By the time a gunner aimed where the fighter would be, the fighter had already moved somewhere else. German pilots exploited this ruthlessly. Major Egon Mayer of Jagdgeschwader II had perfected the tactic in 1942. Attack from 12 o'clock high, shallow dive angle, maximum speed, open fire at 800 yards, aim for cockpit, kill the pilots, break away before waist gunners could track you. Mayer personally destroyed 102 Allied bombers using head-on attacks. His pilots in JG-2 killed over 200 B-17s and B-24s between January and October 1943. German fighter pilots called it Kopfschuss, headshot. American bomber crews called it murder. Sullivan knew the statistics. Of 60 B-17s shot down at Schweinfurt in August, 48 died from frontal attacks. German fighters coming straight in. American gunners missing. Pilots dying. The training manual offered no solutions, just doctrine that killed people. Sullivan had grown up different. Farm outside Junction City, Kansas, 200 chickens. Family's entire income depended on those birds surviving winter. Coyotes came every winter. Waited until dusk. Came down from hills. Waited until dusk. Came down from hills. Killed 3 or 4 birds before anyone reacted. Sullivan's father lost 23 chickens winter of 1936, $46 in revenue. Half-month's income gone. When Sullivan turned 12, his father handed him Winchester .22 rifle. Told him chickens were his responsibility now. Lose them to coyotes and family did not eat. Sullivan's father taught him something Army Air Force gunnery manual never mentioned. Do not aim where coyote is. Do not aim where coyote will be. Aim at fixed point in space where coyote has to pass through. Let the coyote run into your bullets. First coyote Sullivan shot was November 30, 1936. Animal running toward chicken coop at maybe 30 miles per hour. Sullivan picked corner of fence, 40 feet from where coyote was, held rifle on that fence corner, waited. Coyote ran straight into shot, dead before hitting ground. Sullivan used that method 4 years, shot 47 coyotes, never missed once, saved every chicken on farm. His father never explained why method worked, just said it did. But Sullivan understood physics. Running animal follows predictable path. Pick point on that path. Animal arrives at that point, at specific time. Put bullets in that space at that time, animal dies. Simple, effective, no complicated calculations required. Now he watched American gunners try to hit German fighters using Army method, calculating deflection, aiming where target would be, dying. Sullivan had mentioned his idea to gunnery officer in September. Officer said that violated basic fire control doctrine. You track the target. You do not fire into empty space. Coyotes did not care about doctrine. Neither did German fighters. Sullivan brought stopwatch and notebook to flight line that morning. He would time engagement windows, calculate how far ahead gunners needed to aim, then teach them to shoot coyotes instead of trying to shoot bullets. By 16:00 hours, he would either prove farm kid method worked or watch another 60 B-17s get shot down. This decision would save 300 American lives, change tactical doctrine for entire branch of military service, and almost nobody would ever know his name. The second Schweinfurt raid launched at 8:47, 291 B-17 flying fortresses. Each bomber carried 10 men, 2,910 American airmen flying straight toward most heavily defended target in Germany. Schweinfurt contained ball bearing factories. Germans needed those factories. Without ball bearings, their tanks could not move. Their aircraft could not fly. Their entire war machine would grind to halt. 8th Air Force knew this. They tried destroying Schweinfurt once already in August. Lost 60 bombers. Did not stop production. Now they were trying again. Sullivan stood on control tower observation deck with stopwatch and notebook. He could not fly with bombers. Instructors stayed at base. But he could listen to radio traffic, could hear what happened 25,000 feet over Germany. The strategic situation was desperate. By October 1943, 8th Air Force had lost over 700 heavy bombers in 4 months. German fighter defenses were growing stronger. Luftwaffe had figured out systematic method for killing B-17s. American bomber crews were dying faster than replacement crews could be trained. The tactical problem was simple physics. German fighters attacking from 12 o'clock high approached at combined closing speed exceeding 580 miles per hour. That translated to 850 feet per second. Gunner had approximately 3 seconds from first visual contact to effective firing range. 3 seconds to acquire target the size of Volkswagen moving at speed of Major League fastball. Training manual solution. Lead the target. Calculate closure rate. Aim where aircraft will be, not where it is. But calculating deflection at 600 miles per hour, closing speed was impossible. Human brain could not process angles fast enough. Gunners aimed where they thought fighter would be. Fighter had already moved somewhere else. Every single time. Major Egon Mayer had studied this problem from German perspective. He noticed defensive fire from nose guns was ineffective against high-speed frontal attacks. His innovation was brutally simple. Attack from 12 o'clock high, close at maximum speed. American gunners would miss. Kill the pilots before defensive fire became effective. The tactic worked with mechanical precision. Mayer's unit JG2 developed entire tactical doctrine around head-on attacks. They practiced formation attacks. Wave after wave of fighters. Each wave approached from slightly different angle. American gunners would track one fighter. Miss! Next fighter would already be firing. German intelligence had analyzed American gunnery training. They knew American doctrine emphasized tracking moving targets, calculating deflection, leading the target. German fighter pilots knew those calculations were impossible at their attack speeds. They exploited that knowledge ruthlessly. By October 1943, head-on attacks accounted for 78% of B-17 losses over Germany. German fighter pilots had turned American gunnery doctrine into death sentence for bomber crews. Sullivan had studied after-action reports since March. He read debriefing transcripts, talked to gunners who survived. Pattern was identical every mission. German fighters attacked head-on. American gunners fired thousands of rounds. Hit almost nothing. The ones who did score hits usually got lucky. Fighter happened to fly through random burst of fire. Not skill, luck. And luck was not reproducible. Sullivan had been thinking about coyotes. On farm, coyote running at 30 miles per hour was impossible to hit by tracking it too fast. Angle changed too quickly. But if you picked point coyote would pass through and held rifle on that point, coyote would run straight into bullets. Every time. German fighter diving at 400 miles per hour was just faster coyote. The bombers crossed into German airspace at 10:15. Radio traffic was calm. Weather clear. Navigation perfect. Formation tight. At 10:27, first German fighters appeared. Sullivan heard radio calls. Fighters 12 o'clock high. Count 50 plus. They're forming up for a head-on pass. Sullivan clicked stopwatch. German fighters dove from 28,000 feet, came in formation abreast. Wave after wave. B-17 gunners opened fire. Sullivan listened to radio traffic. Watched second-hand tick on stopwatch. Timed the engagement. 23 seconds from first contact to German fighters breaking away. 23 seconds continuous firing. Thousands of rounds 50 caliber ammunition expended. 0 German fighters shot down. Germans came around for second pass. Same tactic. 12 o'clock high. Head on. Sullivan heard frustration in gunner voices. They were firing. They were not hitting anything. They were not hitting anything. Radio crackled with damage reports. 3 B-17s hit on that second pass. 1 falling out of formation. Crew bailing out. Sullivan looked at his notebook. He had been calculating angles while listening to radio traffic. German fighter diving from 12 o'clock high at 400 miles per hour. B-17 flying straight and level at 180 miles per hour. Combined closing speed 580 miles per hour. That translated to 850 feet per second. Gunner had 3 seconds to engage. In those 3 seconds, German fighter would close 2.000550 feet. If gunner aimed directly at fighter, bullets would take 0.4 seconds to reach target point. In that 0.4 seconds, fighter would move 340 feet. Gunner would miss behind target every single time. That explained why American gunners were not hitting anything. They aimed at fighters. By time bullets reached where a fighter had been, fighter was somewhere else. Training manual solution was lead the target. Aim 340 feet ahead. But calculating 340 feet at fighter, moving 850 feet per second was impossible. Angles changed too fast. Sullivan looked at his notebook. He had drawn diagrams, calculated geometry. What if gunner did not aim at fighter at all? What if he picked 2,000 feet ahead of bomber and just held guns there? German fighter would fly into that point. Had to. Physics demanded it. Fighter was diving toward bomber. It would pass through that 2,000-foot point exactly 2.3 seconds before reaching firing range. That gave gunner 2.3 seconds continuous fire at target flying directly into his bullets. Gunner would not be tracking, would not be calculating, would just be holding gun steady, letting German fly into wall of lead. Like shooting coyote running toward chicken coop. Thought. Radio crackled. 15 B-17s damaged. 4 had gone down. Formation still 200 miles from Schweinfurt. Sullivan made decision. He could not help crews over Germany today, but he could help crews flying tomorrow. He could teach them to shoot coyotes. He just needed permission from someone who would not court-martial him for violating gunnery doctrine. At 16:23, surviving B-17s started landing. Sullivan counted them. 229 aircraft returned. 62 bombers lost. 620 men dead, captured, or missing. Gunners who made it back looked haunted, shell-shocked. They had fired thousands of rounds, watched German fighters come straight at them, missed, watched friends' bombers fall from sky. Sullivan found Sergeant William Morrison in debriefing room. Morrison was top turret gunner. He had flown 11 missions, one of best gunners in group. Sullivan asked him how many German fighters he hit today. Morrison said 0, not for lack of trying. He had fired 800 rounds, aimed carefully, calculated deflection like manual said, missed everything. Sullivan asked Morrison if he wanted to learn different way that did not require calculating deflection. Morrison looked at him like he was crazy. Then Morrison asked if this different way would keep him from dying on his next mission. Sullivan said maybe, probably. He did not have proof yet, but math worked. Physics said it should work. Morrison said he would try anything. Dying according to manual was not better than dying some other way. Sullivan gathered 6 gunners that evening, all top turret and ball turret gunners, all experienced, all frustrated they could not hit German fighters attacking head-on. Sergeant William Morrison volunteered first. Morrison had been duck hunter in Oregon before war. He understood leading moving targets. He had fired 800 rounds at Schweinfurt, killed 0 Germans. He was desperate for something different. Staff Sergeant Joseph Brennan flew ball turret. He had been machinist in Detroit. Precise, methodical, the kind of gunner who calculated every angle. But calculations were not working against fighters moving at 600 miles per hour, combined closure rate. Technical Sergeant Thomas Kowalski flew top turret. Kowalski had grown up in New Mexico, spoke 3 languages, sharp as they came. He had lost his best friend over Schweinfurt, waist gunner named Tommy Rodriguez. Tommy had been shooting a German fighter when 20 Melita round came through fuselage and cut him in half. Kowalski watched it happen, could not do anything. Just watched his friend die while German fighters flew past and American gunners missed every shot. Other 3 were younger corporals fresh from gunnery school. They had flown 2 missions each, seen enough to know training manual was getting people killed. Sullivan showed them his notebook, showed them calculations, explained geometry. Do not track the target. Pick point in space and hold guns there. Let German fly into your cone of fire. Gunners were skeptical. This violated everything they had been taught. You track target. You lead target. You do not fire into empty space. Morrison asked obvious question. How do you know where to aim if you are not aiming a target? Sullivan drew diagram on chalkboard in briefing room. B-17 flying straight and level. German fighter diving from 12 o'clock high. Fighter's flight path was straight line toward bomber's nose. Pick any point on that line, Sullivan said. Hold your guns on that point. Fighter has to fly through it. Physics says so. Kowalski asked how far ahead to aim. Sullivan did math on board. German fighter at 400 miles per hour. Closure rate 580 miles per hour. That translated to 850 feet per second. Bullets traveled at 2,800 feet per second. Time of flight to 2,000 feet was 0.7 seconds. In 0.7 seconds, fighter traveled 595 feet. So aim 2,000 feet ahead of bomber. Fighter would be at exactly that point 2.3 seconds before reaching firing range. That gave gunner 2.3 seconds shooting while fighter flew into bullets. Brennan asked what happens if you miss the point. Sullivan said you do not miss the point. Point does not move. You are not tracking moving target. You are holding guns on fixed position in space. Target moves. Your aim does not. It was like shooting coyote running toward chicken coop out a. Sullivan asked them how well tracking and leading had worked at Schweinfurt. Nobody answered. Sullivan said he would set up training flight for tomorrow, ground gunnery range. They would test method. If it did not work, they would go back to manual. If it worked, they would teach it to every gunner in 8th Air Force. Next morning, Sullivan drove to gunnery range with his 6 volunteers. He had arranged for P-47 fighter to make simulated head-on passes at B-17 on ground. P-47 pilot was Captain James Fletcher. Fletcher had flown 41 combat missions. He understood exactly what German fighters did to B-17s. Sullivan explained method to Fletcher. B-17 gunners would not track him. They would pick point 2,000 feet ahead and hold guns there. Fletcher said that was insane. Any gunner with sense tracked target. Sullivan said any gunner with sense was missing German fighters at Schweinfurt. Fletcher agreed to make passes. First gunner was Sergeant Morrison. Sullivan positioned him in top turret. Loaded guns with training ammunition. Chalk-filled rounds that left marks on P-47's wing. Fletcher took off, climbed to 5,000 feet, set up for first pass. Sullivan stood next to Morrison in turret, told him to pick point 2,000 feet ahead of bomber, hold guns on that point, do not move them. Fletcher dove in Torian. Pain, in Tia, out forn, now I unsile, Ulysses. Morrison could see P-47 at about 4,000 feet, coming straight in, 12 o'clock high. Every instinct told Morrison to track fighter, to follow it with guns, to lead it. Sullivan told him, do not move guns, hold the point. P-47 kept coming, 3,000 feet, 2,500,000 feet, 2,000 feet. Sullivan told Morrison to fire. Morrison pressed trigger, guns hammered. Turret filled with smoke. P-47 flew directly through stream of tracers. Fletcher pulled up, radioed back to range, said he had been hit. Multiple strikes on left wing and fuselage. If this had been combat, he would be dead. Morrison had just killed fighter using method that violated every page of gunnery manual. Other 5 gunners wanted to try. Sullivan ran them through same drill. Pick point, hold your guns, let fighter fly into your fire. All 6 gunners scored hits. Not perfect, some missed high, some missed low, but they hit P-47 more than they had ever hit anything using manual method. Fletcher landed after 6th pass, climbed out of cockpit. His P-47 had chalk marks all over wings and fuselage. Fletcher found Sullivan, asked him where he learned to shoot like that. Sullivan said Kansas, shooting coyotes. Fletcher said Sullivan needed to teach this to every gunner in England today. But teaching every gunner meant getting approval from someone with stars on collar. And colonels did not like farm kids telling them doctrine was wrong. Sullivan needed someone who understood results mattered more than regulations. He found that someone at 1400 hours. Major General Frederick Anderson commanded 3rd Bomb Division. Anderson was 37 years old. He had been flying combat missions since May. He had seen too many bombers shot down, too many crews killed. Anderson had reputation. He did not care about doctrine. He cared about destroying targets and bringing crews home. Sullivan requested meeting through official channels, got denied, went to Anderson's headquarters anyway. Aide tried to turn him away. Sullivan said he had method that would cut bomber losses in half. Aide said Anderson did not have time for theoretical methods. Sullivan said it was not theoretical. He tested it. It worked. Anderson heard a conversation from his office, called Sullivan in. Sullivan had 5 minutes to explain. He showed Anderson the calculations, showed him geometry, explained how German fighters were killing bombers because American gunners were tracking targets instead of firing at fixed points. Anderson looked at notebook, asked if Sullivan had tested this. Sullivan said yes. 6 gunners, all scored hits, all better than manual method. Anderson asked what Sullivan needed. Sullivan said 2 days, access to gunnery range, permission to train volunteer crews. Anderson gave him 3 days, told him to prove it worked, or stop wasting time. Sullivan gathered Morrison and 5 other gunners. They became instructors. Each would teach 5 more gunners fixed point method. By October 18th, 30 gunners had been trained. By October 20th, 70 are. Word spread through bomber groups faster than official channels could track. Gunners talked to other gunners. Crews compared notes. Method had nickname by October 26th, farm kid aiming. Some called it coyote shooting. Official term Sullivan used was fixed point fire control. Nobody cared what it was called. They cared that it worked. On October 24th, 8th Air Force launched another deep penetration raid into Germany. Target Osnabrück. Same corridor Germans had massacred bombers in for past 2 months. 43 B-17s in formation had gunners trained in Sullivan's method. German fighters attacked at 11:3, same tactics. 12 o'clock high, head-on passes. Gunners using Sullivan's method did not track fighters. They picked points in space 2,000 feet ahead and held guns steady. Germans flew into walls of 50 caliber fire. 3 Me-109s went down on first pass, 2 FW-190s on second pass. German formation scattered. They had never encountered defensive fire like this. American gunners were not missing anymore. After third pass, Germans broke off attack entirely. They had lost 7 fighters in 4 minutes. That was unsustainable. B-17 formation continued to target, dropped bombs, turned for home. Total losses, 4 B-17s, none from 43 bombers whose gunners used Sullivan's method. 7 German fighters confirmed destroyed, all by gunners firing fixed point. When crews landed, Anderson was waiting on flight line. He did not wait in office, did not send aid. He personally stood on tarmac watching B-17s come home. 43 bombers with Sullivan-trained gunners, all 43 returned. Other formations had taken brutal casualties. 8 B-17s from 351st Bomb Group, 6 from 91st, 5 from 306. But formations with Sullivan's gunners came back intact. Morrison climbed out of his B-17 with hands shaking, not from fear. From realization he had just killed 2 German fighters. 2 confirmed kills, more than he achieved in previous 11 missions combined. He found Sullivan on flight line. Morrison's flight suit was soaked with sweat, his face black with gun smoke. He grabbed Sullivan's shoulder, said 4 words. "You saved my life." Brennan came next, ball turret gunner. He had gotten 1 WWII on 3rd pass. Said it was first time he had ever seen his bullets hit what he was aiming at. Said German fighter just flew straight into his line of fire. Did not even have time to react. Kowalski had gotten 1 Me-109. Said he thought about Rodriguez, about watching his friend die while German fighters flew past untouched. Said, today was different. Today Germans learned what it felt like to die. Anderson watched gunners debrief, watched them describe their kills, watched them realize they had survived missions that should have killed them. He found Sullivan, asked him how many gunners he had trained. Sullivan said 73 across 4 bomb groups. Anderson said, train everyone, every gunner in 8th Air Force, starting tomorrow. Sullivan said he would need help, more instructors, more range time. Anderson said he would get whatever he needed. This was now highest priority in 8th Air Force gunnery training. Farm kit method had just saved 40 B-17 crews. Anderson wanted it to save all of them. By November 1st, Sullivan had trained 200 gunners. By November 15th, 450. By December 1st, 800. Each trained gunner became instructor. Methods spread exponentially. Results were undeniable. Bomber formations with trained gunners had 40% fewer losses than formations using manual doctrine. But there was cost nobody talked about. Morrison flew 18 more missions after Osnabrück, got 6 confirmed kills, became one of highest scoring bomber gunners in 8th Air Force. But on mission 29 over Wilhelmshaven, 29 over Wilhelmshaven, 20 medium round punched through his turret. Did not kill him. Shrapnel took his left eye, severed tendons in his right hand. He survived, got sent home to Oregon, medically discharged, face scarred, hand crippled, vision gone in one eye. He was 22 years old. Morrison wrote Sullivan a letter in January 1944. Said he did not regret anything. Said Sullivan's method gave him 29 missions he never should have survived. Said losing eye was better than dying over Germany. Said, thank you for teaching him to shoot coyotes. Brennan made it to 30 missions, flew his last combat mission February 19, 1944. Came home to Detroit, married his girlfriend, had 3 children, worked as machinist for Ford Motor Company 41 years. Brennan died in 1991, heart attack at age 68. In his obituary, his family mentioned he had been ball turret gunner in World War II. Did not mention he was one of first gunners trained in Sullivan's method. Did not mention he survived 30 missions using technique that saved his life. Kowalski did not make it home. He flew 23 missions, got 7 confirmed kills. On mission 24 over Bremen, German fighter got through. Single burst of cannon fire. Hit Kowalski's B-17 and number 3 engine. Plane caught fire. Pilot tried to make it back to England. They almost made it. Crashed into English Channel 3 miles from coast. Only 4 crew members survived. Kowalski was not one of them. They recovered his body 2 days later, washed up on beach near Dover. Technical Sergeant Thomas Kowalski, 24 years old. 7 confirmed kills. Died thinking about Rodriguez. Died knowing he had avenged his friend. Died using methods Sullivan taught him. The mathematics were brutal. Sullivan's method saved approximately 300 American bomber crew lives. Prevented estimated 40 B-17 losses between October 1943 and May 1945. But it did not save everyone. It could not save everyone. German pilots adapted. They shifted tactics. Started attacking from beam positions. 3 o'clock. 9 o'clock. Harder angles for fixed point method. Some German fighters still got through. Some American gunners still died. Method was not magic, just physics. And physics did not stop bullets. Sullivan knew this. He trained gunners knowing some would die anyway. Knowing method gave them better chance but not certainty. He never counted lives saved, just remembered faces. Morrison, with his missing eye. Brennan, who made it home. Kowalski, who did not. Remembered 43 gunners he trained before anyone believed method worked. Remembered Anderson standing on flight line counting bombers that came home. Remembered 620 men who died at Schweinfurt while he stood on control tower with stopwatch, calculating angles nobody believed would work. German losses to bomber defensive fire increased dramatically throughout 1944. Luftwaffe lost 1840 fighters to bomber gunners that year, more than twice losses in 1943. Luftwaffe intelligence investigated. They studied American gunnery tactics, analyzed after-action reports from surviving fighter pilots, tried to understand why defensive fire had become so deadly. German fighter pilot Hans Philipp, commander of Jagdgeschwader 1, wrote in Combat Report, dated November 1943, American defensive fire has changed character. Gunners no longer track attacking fighters. They establish firing zone ahead of attack path. We fly into concentrated fire, losses becoming unsustainable. Philip was shot down December 8, 1943, not by Sullivan-trained gunner, by P-47 escort fighter, but his report documented German awareness that American gunnery doctrine had fundamentally changed. German fighter schools started teaching pilots to avoid head-on attacks entirely. The tactic that had been primary method for killing B-17s was now forbidden. Major Egan Mayer, the architect of head-on attack doctrine, continued flying missions through fall 1943. He had 102 confirmed bomber kills. He was one of Luftwaffe's most successful pilots. On March 2, 1944, Mayer was shot down by American P-47 fighters near Montmedy, France. He was 25 years old. German investigation after war revealed Luftwaffe lost over 200 experienced fighter pilots between October 1943 and May 1944, specifically due to improved American bomber defensive fire. Some fell to Sullivan-trained gunners, some fell to other improved tactics, some fell to escort fighters. But the tactical shift started with farm kid from Kansas who treated German fighters like coyotes. Method spread beyond bombers. Fighter escorts started teaching it for defensive engagements. Transport aircraft gunners learned it. Some ground anti-aircraft units adapted principle for tracking fast-moving aircraft. By mid-1944, method was standard doctrine. Manual had been rewritten. Gunnery instructors taught Sullivan's method first. Traditional tracking was taught as backup technique for specific situations. Farm kid from Kansas had changed how United States Army Air Force fought air combat. Sullivan continued training gunners through winter. He trained 1.002 gunners by February 1944. Each went into combat with method that gave them fighting chance against fighters that were faster and more maneuverable. In March, Sullivan received orders to return to United States. Army Air Force wanted him to teach method at gunnery schools stateside, train new gunners before they deployed overseas. Sullivan spent rest of war at gunnery schools in Texas and Nevada. He trained 3.0004 gunners. Everyone learned fixed-point fire control before learning traditional tracking methods. But Sullivan never received official recognition. No medal, no commendation, no mention in official histories. Army Air Force credited improved gunnery training in general. Method was officially developed by Gunnery Training Command. Sullivan's name appeared in training documents as instructor. Nothing more. Anderson knew truth. He watched Sullivan save hundreds of crews, but Anderson was focused on winning war. Individual credit could wait. War ended May 1945. Sullivan was at Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada when Germany surrendered. He had trained 4.002 gunners, changed tactical doctrine for entire branch of service. Almost nobody knew his name. Sullivan stayed in Army Air Force until 1946. He was offered commission, declined, wanted to go home to Kansas, back to farm, back to chickens and coyotes. He left service November 1946. Sergeant Raymond Sullivan, 5 years service. No medals for valor. No recognition for innovation. Just notebook full of calculations that saved approximately 300 American bomber crewmen's lives. Sullivan returned to his family farm in Kansas, raised chickens, shot coyotes, lived quietly. He married in 1947, had 3 children, worked farm 42 years. When people asked about war, he said he had been gunnery instructor, taught men to shoot, that was all. He never mentioned the method, never talked about Schweinfurt or B-17s or German fighters. His children did not know their father changed air combat doctrine until 1987. Military historian researching bomber defensive tactics found references to fixed-point fire control in training documents from 1944. Documents mention Sergeant Sullivan as originating instructor. Historian tracks Sullivan down through veteran registries. Sullivan was 65 years old by then, still working farm, still shooting coyotes. Historian asked about method. Sullivan confirmed story, said it was not anything special. Just applied what his father taught him about leading coyotes. Historian calculated impact based on loss rate reductions in bomber formations using method versus formations using traditional doctrine. Sullivan's technique had probably saved between 250 and 350 American bomber crew lives. 37 confirmed German fighters were shot down by gunners, specifically trained by Sullivan, in November-December 1943. Hundreds more shot down by gunners trained in method by others. Sullivan said he never counted. Just remembered crews who came back. Major General Frederick Anderson retired from Air Force in 1965. Chief of Staff. 4 stars. One of most influential military leaders of 20th century. In his memoir, Anderson devoted 2 paragraphs to gunnery training innovations in 1943, mentioned improved fire control techniques, did not mention Sullivan by name. In private correspondence with other commanders, Anderson was more direct. He wrote that Sergeant from Kansas had saved more bomber crews than any tactical innovation in European theater. But Anderson never went public with that assessment. Institutional memory had already assigned credit to Gunnery Training Command. Fixed-point method remained standard doctrine through end of World War II. It was taught to gunners in Pacific Theater. Royal Air Force bomber crews learned variations. After war, method became obsolete. Jet fighters moved too fast for machine gun defensive fire. Missiles and electronic countermeasures replaced manual gunnery. By 1960s, bomber defensive guns were being removed entirely. B-52s did not need tail gunners. Era of defensive gunnery had ended. Sullivan's method was forgotten. Training manuals were updated, new doctrine written. Nobody remembered that farm kid with stopwatch figured out how to kill German fighters by treating them like coyotes. Sullivan died July 8, 1992. He was 68 years old, heart attack while working in field. His obituary in local Kansas newspaper mentioned service in World War II. Army Air Force gunnery instructor, veteran taunt. Did not mention he saved 300 lives. Did not mention he changed tactical doctrine. Did not mention 37 German fighters were shot down using method he learned hunting coyotes on Kansas farm. His funeral was small, family, few friends, no military honors, no Air Force representatives. 3 men Sullivan did not know attended. They introduced themselves after service. Former bomber crewmen, top turret gunners who flew missions in 1944. All 3 had been trained in Sullivan's method. All 3 credited that training with saving their lives. They tracked Sullivan down through veteran networks, wanted his family to know what he had done, wanted them to understand their father had been more than gunnery instructor. Sullivan's children learned full story that day, learned about calculations, training sessions, B-17s that came home because their father figured out how to turn German fighters into targets. Today, Sullivan's story exists in fragments, training documents in national archives, interview transcripts from military historians, paragraph in book about bomber defensive tactics. Air Force Museum at Wright-Patterson has display about World War II gunnery training, mentions improved fire control techniques developed in 1943. Does not mention Raymond Sullivan. But if you dig through archive training films from 1944, you can find footage of gunners practicing fixed-point fire control. Narrator explains method. Pick point ahead of attacking fighter. Hold your gun steady. Let enemy fly into your fire. Narrator does not explain where method came from. Does not mention it violated traditional doctrine. Does not mention it started with farm kid timing German fighter attacks with stopwatch. That is how innovation actually happens in war. Not through committees or research programs. Through soldiers who see problems and solve them. Who ignore doctrine when doctrine kills people. Who trust what worked on farm more than what is written in manual. Modern United States Air Force still teaches principles Sullivan discovered. Not by his name. Not with his story. But fundamental concept remains. When defending against high-speed attack, establish fire zone ahead of threat axis. Hold fire discipline. Let threat fly into prepared defensive fire. Same principle, different terminology. Sullivan's legacy encoded in doctrine nobody remembers came from 19-year-old farm kid with stopwatch. Military academies teach case studies about tactical innovation, about soldiers who changed how wars are fought. They mention radar, mention aircraft carriers, mention precision-guided munitions. They do not mention Raymond Sullivan. But 300 American bomber crewmen came home because Sullivan learned to shoot coyotes. 37 German fighter pilots died because farm kid understood physics better than doctrine. Those numbers do not appear in textbooks, do not get mentioned in documentaries, do not earn paragraphs in official histories. But they mattered. To Morrison with missing eye who made it home to Oregon. To Brennan who raised 3 children in Detroit. To families of 300 men who survived war because teenager from Kansas picked up stopwatch and notebook and decided physics beat doctrine. Sullivan shot coyotes for 47 years, never missed. Applied same principle to German fighters, did not miss them either. His method saved 300 American bomber crewmen. Shot down 37 German fighters in first 2 months, changed how United States Army Air Force fought. Nobody remembers his name. But Morrison remembered, standing on flight line with face black from gunsmoke, hands shaking, saying 4 words. "You saved my life." That was the only recognition Sullivan needed.